Hello, I'm Colleen Gallagher, CEO at Onward and Upward, and you're listening to the Association 100 Podcast, where each week we interview association leaders from across the country to hear how they're trying new things, taking big risks, and delivering value for their members. We'll explore the realities of what it means to work in and with associations and bring you the insights and inspiration you need to advance your career and make big changes at your association. Let's get started.
Welcome back to the A100 Podcast. I'm your host, Colleen Gallagher, and I'm excited to continue our January media series today with Company Dime co-founder Jay Campbell. Jay is a veteran journalist with 30 years of experience in travel trade publishing. He began his career at Boston's Air Travel Journal while earning his journalism degree from Boston University. He then served multiple tenures at Business Travel News, ultimately as editorial director through 2013. He founded travel business newsletter, The Beat, in 2004, and co-founded Travel Procurement Magazine in 2006. Jay started the company Dime with David Jonas in 2014, dedicated to delivering more than just news. The company Dime is about insights, and their mission is quality journalism for those interested in business travel services, expense management practices, and travel industry change. I've known Jay for many years now, thanks to my time at the Global Business Travel Association, and I can attest to his credentials as a great journalist, and I'm really excited to have him on the podcast today. Jay, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you, Colleen. It's really nice to be here and reconnect with you, and thanks for all those kind words.
Absolutely. So you've been a voice in business travel journalism for a lot of years now. I would love to just start by hearing about your journey as a reporter and really what drew you to this field.
Sure. I was bitten by the journalism bug at a very young age, and I started writing for local papers as a teenager. I went to Boston University for journalism, and when I was there, I really needed a paying internship, not a non-paying internship. If anyone is familiar with BU's tuition rates, they'll know why that was. And so I found one at the newspaper of Logan Airport. And so part of my job there was to review the national travel industry trade publications, and that's how I discovered those. And then after I graduated, I got a job at Business Travel News, moved to New York after college, and I've had various roles at different companies since all then. But, it's just an interesting sort of corner of the business world, corporate travel. And the people are great, as you know. I've stuck with it.
That's awesome. I am a huge fan of all kinds of trade publications. Obviously, working with associations, that's the lifeblood of so many associations, and that's where their members are and what they're reading. So I'm always fascinated by this world, and particularly having spent so much time around corporate travel with the travel trades as well. I'd be curious. Obviously, a lot has changed during your time covering this industry, and what have been some of the most significant changes you've seen in how travel is covered and really how it's understood by the public in particular?
I think it's probably pretty similar to the consumer media and other industries as well in terms of the medium, right? I graduated from BU in journalism in 1995, and that school year was the year that Netscape Navigator came out, eBay started, and Amazon started, right? So it was this huge, momentous change in information. And I was lucky enough to catch actually a couple of courses before I graduated on, hey, there's this new thing happening, you got to check it out. So the first third of my career was really all about the initial grappling with how does the internet change newspapers, really. We were a trade newspaper. It was twice a month, but it was in print. And so I think that's been the biggest impact. It affects the speed of the delivery of the information. And for good or bad, you can basically customize your incoming feeds, so to speak. In terms of business travel in particular, I think the biggest impact has a bit of a PR angle in terms of awareness throughout organizations, right? So back in the day when we were only a printed newspaper, our publication would land on the travel manager's desk every couple of weeks, but really no one else in the organization knew anything about it. It wasn't for them, right? Now, if we write a story about Exxon's travel manager, Exxon's PR department finds out instantly. And so what that's done is it's actually caused big organizations like that to clamp down a little bit on how free their people can be in speaking at industry events or in interviews with us. So it's opportunities and challenges in a way. There are definitely tools that we've been able to use in this internet era that we didn't have before in terms of chasing down information as well. So it's, a lot of change, but I would definitely say that's the biggest thing that's different from when I started.
Yeah, that's interesting. I hadn't thought about that, but that's one of the things on our side we run into. And one of the first questions we'll ask is, can your members talk to press? Because that's a huge part of being able to actually get visibility, is being allowed to. And that's a good point that there is some clamping down, especially at those larger companies, in terms of who can say what and what they can say.
Absolutely. Usually we understand it if it is a company that's like in our industry, right? So I don't know, just make up something here. Like maybe it's Uber, right? So if Uber has a travel manager, that's our kind of target reader. But, they're also like a vendor in our space, and it gets a little bit tricky for them just in terms of PR. But companies that are in totally different industries, sometimes we kind of shake our heads like, why do they care what their travel manager is saying? They get into topics like cost cutting, and that might be like material information for investors. So there's a lot of considerations for big brands.
Yeah, a lot to think about for sure. So the company Dime, you guys are over a decade now, really well respected within the travel space. I know anything I read within it it's well written, it's well researched, and it's good journalism. What inspired you to create it?
Thank you so much. It was really my career journey. I think moving from that early phase of we're still mainly in print, we reached a point where a lot of the readers wanted the information quicker, right? And I actually started a publication called The Beat that's still going today. And that was really just the news by email, which feels like a silly kind of thing. How innovative was that, really? But at the time, it was, not so common. And I think that brought into my career path more of an entrepreneurial role. And I learned a little bit about, what it's like to run a business. And I basically learned that I really don't like having a boss. So I would say not having a boss was a big part of the inspiration for the company Dime. But the other part, probably equally important, is, we have complete control over the entire sort of end-to-end process of the creation and consumption of the information, right? So David and I, my co-founder, David Jonas, and I, we're the journalists, but we're also the tech guys. Like, we run the website. And I think that's really important. For me, that's something I want to have, is full control over the reader's experience and also the technology underneath it, which is pretty tough to pull off in a larger, even a mid-sized publishing company. There's always going to be a central department that has like tickets that you submit when you need something fixed. And that just wasn't for us. So that's a big part of it. It's almost like a sandbox. We get to mold it.
Yeah, I love that. As a fellow business owner, I can relate to the not wanting to have a boss aspect of things too. So I got you there. One thing that I love is that you guys are a subscription model, which is really common now. I think you're seeing everything go to subscription, but 10 years ago, not as much. So why did you guys choose that model? How has it shaped your approach for content creation and the way you engage your audience?
Yeah, so that earlier publication that I started was also a subscription model. And I learned a few things about the pros and cons of running that. And I think what it really comes down to is a compact with the readers, right? So they know virtually all of our revenue comes from them. And that means that that basically we serve them. And so we think it creates confidence in terms of our independence. They can have some comfort that we're not necessarily favoring a company because they spend a lot of money with us. That seems to be a big piece of what has set us apart. Other trade publications, they have the traditional media Chinese wall, and I'm not saying anything is inappropriate about that. It's just that, especially today with trust in the media being such a big challenge, it feels where you could show them where you get your money, it goes a long way.
What I think logically, I've worked in those situations where you say this is separate, this doesn't matter, but you still, when you see it, when you're on the other end and you're sponsored by it, it's hard to have the real trust. There's a part of you that no matter what you want to thinks, are they influenced by that sponsor? So I get that.
Yeah, and there was even this kind of phenomenon that really put me off. I think it started about maybe 15 years ago, of native advertising, it was called at one point, or sponsored content. And you almost have to look hard to see that it is even sponsored. And otherwise, it looks the same as any regular news article on that website. And the FTC has gotten involved with that. That's misleading, if not borderline fraudulent. But yeah, so we just don't have any of that. There's just no way that happens. Yeah, and it helps drive our editorial judgment, because it's a very clear North Star, so to speak. We always want to do what the readers want, right? So if we're trying to figure out, okay, we have 15 story ideas, what can we really focus on? We just put ourselves in the shoes of the readers, and that's the only guide that we need. And it seems to make that decision making a little bit quicker.
Yeah. No, that's great. On our side of things, on the PR side here, we're always wondering what makes journalists tick, what they're thinking. So from your perspective as a journalist and editor, how are you approaching storytelling and thinking about delivering these insights? What is your side of thinking there?
I think so. You have a range of different types of content in a news publication, right? Like we think of one kind of story as really just news, right? Maybe it's more of a timely thing. This happened yesterday and here are the facts, There's news analysis, bit of a deeper unpacking of those facts, right? And you bring in more consultant voices and expert voices to say what it means. Then you have features and you have interviews. So you have a bunch of formats. I like to think about the signal to noise ratio, right? So a reader is investing their time in your article, right? And this is a nice thing about online publishing is as opposed to back when everything was on paper, it was much more structured and rigid. You had to write 1,000 words because that was the space or whatever. Luckily, we don't have that anymore, at least in many media organizations, and we don't have that. So, it's really a judgment about taking their time and making sure that it's worth it. So we just aim for brevity. We're pretty reluctant to write 2,000-3,000 word articles, but if they're packed with good information, we'll do it. Yeah, I guess signal to noise ratio and thinking of it as an investment on their part are some of the ways we think about that. As far as storytelling and maybe a little bit more color or interest or style, those are tricky in B2B publishing because these are people's jobs, right? They don't need to be wowed by your poetry.
That's fair.
So I'd say that comes in like wherever we feel like we can sneak it in without affecting that signal to noise ratio. And it's fun when we can. Like we had a headline a couple of years ago inspired by a Jay-Z song. That was like really fun.
But that's too funny. I love the signal to noise though idea. That's really helpful. How are you guys thinking about AI and how do you feel about it? Loaded question.
It's great. It's really great. It takes some trial and error to figure out where it's useful. And I think we've seen some examples in business media and in a wider media landscape where people have gone too far with it and actually allowed it to do things that humans really still need to be doing.
Yep.
But it's great for a couple of things when it comes to the actual output of the content, just as far as like iterating on phrases and words. Like it's like a souped up thesaurus, right? Like you can just throw stuff at it. But we're really intrigued by the opportunity to use it for the reporting side, really researching, tracking down information and feeling like we've done a comprehensive job of like getting the input that we can then use our brains to organize and put out again. And we're not really there yet, but we're tinkering with some things there.
Yeah.
So
it's exciting. I'm excited to see where it goes for sure.
Yeah.
So could you share, is there a story or a feature you've done over the years with the company Dime that you're really proud of and what made it stand out for you?
I think the one that comes to mind is related to the pandemic. It devastated our industry. There were thousands of layoffs within a matter of weeks, right? And so we were just thinking, what can we do for our people, right? They've been our support for all these years. Like our income is dependent on them. And now they're out of an income. And so we actually offered free subscriptions for anybody who had been laid off. And 570 people took us up on the offer.
Wow.
And so we used that as like a moniker for a series where first of all, we wrote some news analysis about job situation, right? The career prospects in our industry. But we also did like a roundtable interview with 5 of those 570, all of whom are now employed again, I'm glad to say. And we did a few other things, just interviews with career coaches and recruiters and just trying to help people, many of whom had hadn't had to search for a job in decades, right? We just wanted to help them get back on their feet. And the feedback we got from that was so like glowing and it just was really gratifying. So it's B2B publishing, right? We're not like war correspondents or we're not ProPublica, like investigating society's ills. We help people with information they need to do their jobs. And in this case, really more develop their careers, right? And yeah, that whole episode and the feedback we got from that was just tremendous. And it made our work feel much more visceral and just important than it felt before that. That was definitely high on the list.
I love that. That's huge and amazing when you can feel that impact that you're having in a different way when people are going through tough times. It really comes through.
Yeah, we had one reader, I'll never forget this. She had been laid off she was a hotel salesperson, I think, or account manager, and had been laid off and had two very little kids and just was feeling really down about her prospects. This was like the really dark mid 2020 period. And a lot of the other publications in the travel industry were like cheerleading like a little bit and not being all that realistic about how bad things were. And we were calling it like it is. Like we were trying to say, we weren't sugarcoating. And she told me that got her through. She actually said, like, I felt like it got me through. It allowed me to, keep some hope that I have opportunity in this space. And now she's like a successful entrepreneur in travel. Like she,
That's so cool.
came back and yeah. So, that stuff is just so gratifying. And it's actually one of the positives of this internet era. Because back in the day when it was only print, you just didn't get, once in a while you get a letter, but like even as much. Well, sometimes someone will say, I read that article, it was great. We get feedback pretty often, comments on the website, all that stuff. And it's all really great. Just keeping us on our toes, keeping us honest.
Yeah.
I think a lot of people interpret journalists as thinking that they're, I don't want to say perfect, but smarter than everybody else or just holier or whatever. But we all know that we're all human. We're making mistakes all the time. We want people to tell us about them. I wish that would happen more often, but fortunately, like I say, they are telling us a lot about when they get something out of it, and that's pretty great.
Nice. And you talked earlier about you thinking about that investment for your readers on their behalf in terms of reading what you're putting out there. How are you balancing delivering in-depth industry reporting with making it accessible and engaging for your readers? You also mentioned the story length and things like that. So what are you thinking on that front?
Yeah, actually, accessibility has a few different connotations, right? But one way that it's a challenge for us is just in our business model, right? We need to have a paywall. You have to sign in if you're paying for the subscription. We've seen a lot of experimentation on paywalls, and we just figured out that with our size of our market and level of relevance to the people's work, we have to have a pretty hard paywall. We don't even have a free trial anymore and can't read 2 articles for free. There's none of that. One thing we do is we do have some content outside the paywall. So smaller reports we'll do sometimes. We do guest posts like op-eds. Those will be outside the paywall. And we do have an occasional newsletter that's mostly kind of odds and ends, but it has a little bit of personality to it. So that's one way to look at accessibility. Is that where you were going with that question? Or
that makes sense. I think that's pretty spot on. And I do think that is a brave stance to take on the paywall, but a smart one, because otherwise people just find a way around it. If you're going to go paywall, I think you've got to go all in on it.
People still find a way around it. I'm not going to share them on this podcast, but there are 2 or 3 tips or techie tricks that people who are developers can do. But it's funny because our community is small enough where people are reluctant to say, I read that story when they aren't a subscriber. So we've had a few silly situations where we've discovered like, oh, okay, they actually cheated or whatever. And when I was younger, I would be like, oh, I'm all pissed off about that and send them a nasty email. But it's more of a, I don't know, karma attitude about it. And,
yeah.
Eventually they end up subscribing because they didn't want just that one story.
Exactly.
So,
yeah. Oh, that's too funny. Okay, let's talk about pitching. So what is your ideal way to be pitched by a PR professional?
That's actually pretty easy. We'd like to offer you an exclusive.
All right.
And it's I don't know, it's funny, but I guess we need to produce content that people can't find elsewhere. It's really that simple. It's not that we don't cover things that are already public, or it's not that we don't cover things that are in another publication. But when it comes to a pitch, often we say back, okay, are you calling other media with this? Because if you are, that just takes it down a notch in terms of the value we can add. And I understand if our audience is like 5,000-ish people. We have other publications in our space that are, I think, even over 100,000, tens of thousands. And I get it if they would rather have that sort of broad attention. So I always say it's up to you. We're probably going to do, if we choose to cover this thing, like an in-depth piece on it, and it most likely will be pretty thoughtful, and we'll get other people's take, and it'll be a good read. but it's going to be a little bit less of a sort of a scope, or it won't be amplified quite as much as if you did the same with another organization or you just do a broad press release. So I always put it back on them if it depends on their goals. But usually if we're having that conversation, it's too late for the exclusive. So we're just hoping for next time. Yeah. Often, I would say the vast majority of the pitches are like either off the mark or just aren't going to work because like we always have 20 story ideas going at all times and we've been working on them. And so I guess most of our content is organic. And then occasionally big things happen and we respond to those with analysis and try to add value that way.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. When you say that a lot are off the mark, do you feel that they're too sales pitchy? Does that happen a lot, or what's the main reason that they appear off the mark?
I mean, we get a lot of pitches that okay, so I had made these notes that I was going to share with you. And then I listened to the latest episode of your podcast and I was like, that's so weird because you said a bunch of the same stuff that I had written down. So you're going to think I took this from your podcast. But no, what did you say? Spray and pray, I think it was?
Yeah, can't do that.
We get a lot of that. You know, I called it blanket pitches. They just didn't do their research, right? So we got one the other day, digital marketing tools driving success in 2025. And I'm like, we obviously don't cover digital marketing. If you know that, if you looked at our website, and it just ended up being spam. So now this agency that sent it to us, I think, they're the spammy one. That's just not good. So
yeah.
You said a few of the things that I had in mind. Do your research, like just, learn who you're trying to reach and maybe even think about what their goals are. The about page tells you a lot, And I think most journalists, I should speak just for myself. If somebody was in PR and they just wanted to take 5 minutes of my time and ask me a few questions to elaborate on what's on our about page, we're happy to do it. So I think the spraying and praying is like cold calling. It's 101 or something. It's basic level work. And it actually ends up just annoying people. So, feels like it's counterproductive.
Yeah, I found that's the quickest way to get in a journalist's bad side than anything. Just that or promising things you can't deliver on. It doesn't help.
Yeah.
Yeah. On the flip side, when you're reaching out to PR people, one, do you do that often? Do you go to the PR people or are you going straight to a source? How does that work? And when you do, how are you hoping they respond?
Yeah, I think my attitude about this has really evolved over the years. There was like early in my career, I got some bad advice and it was basically like, you need to go around the PR people. Like they're never helpful. And I don't think that's true, but anything, there are a lot of different approaches. And so we have a few different almost levels of organizations we work with. You could imagine we're pretty often calling United and Delta. So we know those PR people pretty well. And, but then there'd be like, the familiarity goes down from there. And then you get all the way to a point where it's a company you don't even know and you're calling someone out of the blue. And so I guess I would say when we contact them, transparency would be what we're looking for. I don't know the answer. I'll get you on the phone with that executive, or let me see if I can get you that answer. It depends on the situation with the story. It may be that we're looking for an interview, or maybe that we just want a quick fact check. But we're also okay with no comment. Like I know companies and other organizations really try not to say that. I guess there's some notion, you know better than me, that sounds bad to the readers and the viewers. I don't know. But for us, it's like a challenge. It's okay, no comment. Well, they said no comment to our competitors. And this is like inviting us to employ our skills, and to go and find out stuff. And that's basically what our readers pay us to do, is to find out stuff that they can't find elsewhere. I guess I would say anything is fine when we reach out. I'm trying to think of a situation where some things are pretty obvious, right? We have had situations where we felt like we were lied to, and then we found out that we were. Mm-hmm. And that's crazy, right? Yeah. A huge no-no. And it's actually not usually the media relations person's doing. It's that they were told, right? And this is an unfortunate situation, and maybe a tough part of the role is to be this like interpreter between management and the media, because business executives don't necessarily understand how media work, and that you can't they're not like your marketing division extended or something. So I think we've had quite a few different situations, but most often it's like the best thing is, I'll get right on that. And that quick answer and the transparency.
Yeah. That's so interesting about the truth-telling piece of it too, because I think one of my biggest advice for young PR professionals is to remember that your reputation goes well beyond the company you work for. That's not the be-all, end-all, and you need to be truthful at all costs, and if that costs a job, that wasn't the right job for you,
Yeah, I would think that no comment is better than
right?
false information.
Yeah.
Yeah, or I would think. But yeah, but in terms of my attitude that has evolved is nowadays I really, sure, we want to talk to the executives most often. It's always more rich of a discussion when you're actually able to have a true Q&A. And then we get into little sometimes issues about, oh, can they have the questions in advance? And we're like, no, we feel like they're big boys or girls and they can handle it.
You'd be
You train
shocked
them,
how
didn't
many
you?
of them ask for that, though. And I'm always like, we can't. That's not how it's going to work. You just have to be able to do the interview. And they'll just ask. And I'm like,
Ask. I mean, I think asking is fine. It doesn't hurt to ask. I think a lot about sort of bias and objectivity and how complicated the human brain is. And so if you're going to ask for the questions ahead of time and I'm like, yeah, we don't really do that. Do I now have a lingering negative feeling? I don't know. I just don't know enough about psychology to say, but does that end up getting reflected in the cover? It's like, I'm human. I don't know. Probably not. We're trained to set that stuff aside, but how effective is that? So anyway, it feels like a little bit of unnecessary friction in sort of the process, but not every executive. Some of them are just great with the press, right? They know exactly how to share enough information that's an interesting story, but not enough, but not so much that they say something they're not supposed to, right? That's a rare thing, actually. Yeah. I could see it being pretty tough for organizations to try and identify and then put forward those kind of charismatic people because they have other duties as well. So the ones who don't have as much experience, I can totally understand why they ask for the questions ahead of time. But I don't even know if it's very productive though, because then they end up almost scripting their answers.
Robotic.
And then the reporter might ask a totally different question of something else happened since the interview was scheduled. And you can say, oh, not fair. You didn't give it to us before.
Right.
I don't know.
Yeah. Yep. There's always something. Our audience is primarily associations. So I know, like you mentioned, you work with like the Deltas and the Uniteds and a lot of travel companies, but you've also worked with a lot of association PR professionals over the years, myself included. What do you think associations do well in terms of media relations and where can they improve?
So we've worked with quite a few associations over the years, but mainly GBTA. And I think they stand out, actually. I think they're pretty good with media relations. A few things I would say that they do, and some of this I think you continued, and some of it I think maybe you started. First of all, you as a journalist in the industry, you can attend the events for free. This was like such a tradition that I was shocked the first time I heard of an association that doesn't allow that. I'm like, what? Wait, what do you mean?
Yeah,
that's I don't know. It sounds condescending, but it feels like a no-brainer, right? Because you're getting publicity for your event. Nobody's going there in order to write something negative. I don't think anyway. But so, and also, the events are on the record. Like you're speaking in front of 100 people. You can't be like, no, I don't want to be quoted. But I've encountered that. So those are things that GBTA, first of all, they do allow you to attend. They don't say it's off the record, and that's all great. They also provide recordings and photos. And I assume that for associations that run events, this means having a little fine print in the attendee registration, you may be photographed or the media will be there, whatever. So it takes a little bit of setup. But I think those are all great. And I think for the most part, and maybe entirely or just about entirely, it's good for the association. You're positioned in a news article as like the place to be, the place to learn stuff and to network. And I guess maybe an area for improvement for the associations in our space, and maybe many of them is, and actually you talked about this on your podcast too, making subject matter experts available. I could see associations offering like a speakers bureau or an expert directory, and it could even be a digital tool where you just like quickly can get someone who can give you a quote. And obviously that's most important on breaking news. We're always looking to not just rewrite the press release, but also get a few voices in there and some takes on it. And so anything that can facilitate that, I would think would be great for any journalist in any industry. And the associations are filled with experts, right? Many of them will be volunteers. Do they want to be on call, basically, for reporter questions? So, there's a lot to work out to make that happen. But there are platforms that do that generally for all sorts of reporters and different subject areas. And I would think, yeah, any given association offering that could go a long way.
Yeah, that's really good to hear. And you answered this next question I was thinking about a little bit already, but all of our associations we talk to, they want to be the go-to source. That's just their universal way of saying they want everyone to come to them when they're thinking about that industry, whether it's the general public, policymakers, news, you name it. What's your best advice for them in terms of achieving that in a very crowded media landscape that we're in today?
Yeah, I think a lot of them do this already, but basically act as content producers. I don't know if you call them media, really. Plenty of blogs and podcasts, email, newsletters. And I'm sure this exists somewhere, but some associations will have their own basically media division and they'll produce a magazine. But I guess what I was saying is maybe exists somewhere is like autonomy for the editorial part of it. And this I actually don't think I have seen it. You might know this exists somewhere. There's the notion of the house organ. And so that's fine, but members and prospective members know that it's like a little bit of publicity more than news or journalism. Is it really so hard to actually set up an ethics-based, like public agreement that basically says, this is our news division and these are the principles? They actually operate autonomously. They're like a watchdog even on the industry and on us. And it's just, it seems like it could be fairly doable to have basically a public document that says what the guidelines are. And that would create a lot of trust for, for the constituents in that industry. And maybe it's needed more than in the past because a lot of media companies have closed down and left industries. I don't know. But, ours is, I think, business travel is pretty dynamic. And so we have quite a few different organizations, right? But some other industries are smaller and your association might be the only information provider in the space. But, establishing that trust with a quasi-journalistic organization's division or something seems like it could, but I don't know. I'm just throwing that out there.
Yeah.
I do that.
I like that. No, that's a great idea. I think that's a really good thought. I think some associations might be close, but that like little extra making it official and really that separation there, church and state, that could go a long way in terms of the credibility and authority they could gain.
I get that it's tricky, right? Organizations, whether they are associations or media companies, they need funding to run events or to pay for staff. And you may run into that situation that I think, hopefully anyway, some of our large mainstream newspapers don't really deal with this. I can't imagine that Delta Airlines calls up the New York Times when there's like a story that didn't go Delta's way and says, I'm going to pull my advertising like that. That wouldn't, but it does happen in trade media. That kind of thing does happen. And so it's a tough spot to be in. If you're an association, you have a platinum sponsor of your convention and your independent editorial arm, decides to, but like, I don't know. I think we all get it if the rules are laid out there, right? And I don't know. It seems possible.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that. This has been such a great conversation. I really appreciate all your insights and you taking the time. Before we let you go today, though, we like to wrap up every podcast with our little Just for Fun section, which is a quick lightning round, some questions for our audience to get to know you a little better. So have you gotten to get away to anywhere fun lately?
Not so recently, but I do have 2 teenagers and we brought them to London and Amsterdam last spring. So that was pretty cool. The weather was dreary, but the sun came out for 2 hours when we were at the tulip farm in the Netherlands. So yeah, that worked out.
I love that. That's so awesome. How about podcasts? What are you listening to and what would you recommend others listen to?
I've actually never been much of a podcast person. I don't have a commute and I'm just a written word kind of guy, but I did recently get sucked into my first podcast. Ooh. It's called Hardcore History with Dan Carlin. It's a little unusual. They'll do a 6-hour episode with no commercials. I know a lot about Vikings from the year 900 if you want to do that one on the next episode. But yeah.
I actually feel like my husband might listen to that one because this is sounding really familiar. Too funny. All right. What's one place in the U.S. you've never been but are dying to go?
I've never been to Portland, Oregon.
Ooh,
so that's interested in going there. It seems, from what I hear, it's similar to Brooklyn, New York, where I live. Breweries and restaurants. And yeah, I do want to check out Portland someday.
Yeah, that's a fun spot. I haven't been there in years, but I did. It's great for running. I love running, so it's a good running area too.
Okay. Yeah.
All right. So finish this sentence. When you see me looking at my phone, it probably means that I'm
deciding whether to approve an App Store purchase by one of my kids.
Oh gosh, I'm not ready for that.
There's no getting ready. There's no prep for that. Yeah.
That's too funny. Awesome. Jay, thank you again. I really just appreciate your time and your sharing your insights with us today on the podcast.
Yeah, thanks, Colleen. Good luck with the rest of the series.
That's a wrap for today's episode. The Association 100 Podcast is a production of Onward and Upward Marketing and Communications, where our mission is to make associations and nonprofits the go-to source in their industries through earned media and thought leadership. This podcast is an extension of the A100 newsletter, a bi-monthly collection of best practices, top trends, helpful ideas, and smart strategies delivered straight to your inbox. Have you undertaken a big change at your association, or do you have some words of wisdom for the trenches of association life? We want to hear from you, and so do our listeners. Drop us a note at info@onwardupward.com. That's info@onwardupward.com. If you like what you heard today, be sure to subscribe, give us a 5-star review, and share with your friends and colleagues. We're available anywhere podcasts are found. Come back next week for more association inspiration and insights. Thanks for tuning in.